We start with bombshell breaking news out of Idaho tonight, brought to you first by NewsNation. Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Our own Brian Entin is the first to report that accused Idaho college killer Bryan Kohberger has accepted a plea deal in the savage murders of 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022. Sources confirm that Kohberger will now plead guilty to committing the 4 murders and to a burglary charge. And in exchange, prosecutors will drop the death penalty. Entin has also learned that Kohberger must agree to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole and must waive all rights to any appeal. The family of one of the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez, is already lashing out at the news tonight, posting on social media, "It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all your love and support." Now, up to this point, Kohberger had vehemently denied any involvement in the students' brutal murders, long pointing to an alternative perpetrator theory as a defense. But the judge tossed that theory out last week, and Kohberger's trial was set to start in August. Now, instead, a court hearing on the change of plea will begin on Wednesday. For more on all this, let's go straight to Brian Entin. Brian, this is shocking news. You were the first to report it. What led to this plea deal?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't see this coming, and I've been covering this story since the very beginning until Friday. On Friday, I started hearing some rumblings that there were discussions happening behind the scenes, which again, my indication was always that the prosecution wanted to take this to the very end, that Bryan Kohberger would never consider a plea deal, that the prosecution was intent on going after the death penalty. So Friday, I heard the rumblings. There were apparently discussions that happened over the weekend. There was an offer that was made. The prosecution ended up making this offer to the defense, saying that if Bryan Kohberger pleads guilty to all 4 murder charges and agrees to life in prison, no possibility of parole, no possibility of appeal, would also plead guilty to the burglary charge, that they would take death off the table. And I have learned that that offer was sent over last night to Bryan Kohberger's defense team, and that today they accepted the offer. They accepted the plea deal, so there will not be a trial.
And
Elizabeth?
This is a huge change, Brian, because all along, Bryan Kohberger's been saying, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, I had nothing to do with it. He kept pointing to all these other people who it might have been implicated. He's been adamant about maintaining his innocence, and a very, very abrupt face now.
He has been adamant. Even his lawyer, Elizabeth, there were times in court where his lawyer said, I believe my client is innocent. I believe Bryan Kohberger is innocent. There was no indication that they would ever agree to a deal, and there was no indication that the prosecution would ever offer a deal. I can tell you many of the victims' family members, you read that statement, right now are in total shock and disbelief because this has never been brought up to them before this weekend and Friday when these rumblings started to pop up. They never thought a plea deal would be on the table, and they have more questions. Okay, even though he agrees to plead guilty, will there be some kind of confession? Will he say where the murder weapon is? Will some of these questions that they have be answered? They still don't know, they say.
And of course, the big question, why? I want to bring in Ashleigh Banfield, host of Banfield right here on NewsNation. Ashleigh, you've covered this story also from the very start. The families are in shock. Nobody seems to have seen this coming. Are you as shocked as everybody else watching this?
Yes, I am not only in shock, I think I share with Brian a bit of sadness as well, because Elizabeth, you've done this job long enough to know that there's always 2 sides of a courtroom, and one side will be unhappy. It doesn't mean that justice doesn't prevail. This is a different kind of justice. It doesn't feel like justice for a lot of people. Sure as hell doesn't feel like justice for Steve Gonzalez and his family, Kaylee's family. The other families, they weren't all in unison on the death penalty being mandatory in order to feel whole again. They'll never feel whole. Many of them didn't care at this point because they weren't getting their kids back. So it's really hard on the Gonzalez family because they did not want this, and families matter. Prosecutors take into account what victims' families want and don't want. Chris Watts' family's victims' family members said, okay, take death off the table. Let him plead guilty. Let him go behind bars for the rest of his life with no opportunity for parole and no opportunity for an appeal. And we're fine with it. But these families didn't all feel the same way. This is why I'm processing a lot at this point, just strictly covering the justice of it. I don't know that everybody's feeling justice.
Why, Ashleigh, would prosecutors make this offer, and why didn't they reach out to the families to tell them? It feels like, I mean, this is all breaking as we speak. The families are just now issuing these statements, but it sure sounds like they weren't consulted. At least the Gonzalez family says it doesn't sound like they were.
So that's a tough one. Everybody operates differently. Every state operates differently, and then every jurisdiction within a state operates differently. I know that they've been at loggerheads at times with the Gonzalez family because they've been very vocal, and there's been this gag order. It's possible that we don't know. I reached out to Steve Gonzalez a little while ago. He's clearly processing a lot, but I haven't heard whether it is true. In fact, he didn't have any consultation prior to this. I would have a hard time believing there was no consultation prior to the media, finding out about it. However, they don't have to. It is certainly difficult if they don't. I would think it really goes against sort of the moral code of victims' rights to not be consulted, at least. Not that your consultation and your opinion is going to carry. That doesn't always happen, but certainly consultation is very important in this day and age in almost every jurisdiction I've ever covered. But I have to get with Steve to find out whether, in fact, he had a consultation, it was unsatisfactory, and the prosecution went ahead anyway.
Brian, the evidence against Bryan Kohberger is overwhelming, and that might be an understatement. There was a massive amount of physical evidence, of digital evidence that all pointed to one person and one person only, and that was Bryan Kohberger. It feels like to many, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, like a slam dunk case. Why wouldn't the prosecution want to bring this case?
Okay, well, first of all, I have sources who have told me that the family members were consulted, but it was a last-minute consultation. They have been led to believe all along that this thing was going to trial. They have booked Airbnbs for 3 months. They've got plans. They've taken time off work. They were told we're going all the way with the death penalty, and they were not told until the very last minute, not long before I found out that this was going down. So there was a consultation, but it wasn't a very good consultation.
That doesn't sound like a consultation. That sounds like we're letting you know this is happening.
Yes, I think they pretended. This is my take. They pretended to consult, but they had their mind made up. There were backroom negotiations happening, I believe, with the defense since at least Friday. That's what I believe. In terms of why the prosecution may want to do this. You know how it works when you get on death row. Even if they got a conviction, even if then at sentencing the jury said yes to death unanimously, there are people in Idaho who have been on death row for 30 and 40 years. These families would have to go through all of this for decades. Some of the victims' parents may not even be alive when Bryan Kohberger is executed. They would have to be reminded during all of the appeals, et cetera, et cetera. Also, there are surviving victims. Let's not forget about the roommates who are going to have to testify and probably be, thrown under the bus by the defense and have to go through that. I'm sure that came into play with the prosecution. But I agree with Ashleigh. I am saddened for some of these family members because we have gotten to know them, and they have been led along to believe that there was going to be a trial for 2.5 years and not given any information. There's been a gag order, and you just wait for the big day. Just wait for the big day, the big show, the big trial. And now suddenly they've been told that's not happening.
The big day, and Ashleigh, for them, the big answers that so many of them have been waiting for.
Yeah, so that's weird. I can't tell you again that this jurisdiction does it in the way that other jurisdictions do it that I've covered for so long, but typically when you have something like this, There'll be something like an allocution, and the defendant has to stand up in court and offer something, not everything. Chris Watts did not offer everything. He offered some things. We learned some things about the death of his 2 little girls and his wife and his unborn child. So it's possible that Bryan Kohberger will have to stand up in court, not Wednesday. There will be a sentencing. It'll probably be at a different date. I don't expect it'll be Wednesday. The Wednesday is just to change the plea officially.
Okay.
Whether it happens on Wednesday, it could. But I think there'll be some sort of allocution and some sort of detail, but maybe not everything.
All right, Brian, Ashleigh, stand by for a second. I want to bring in NewsNation Law and Justice contributor and former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who also has been covering this story from the very start. Jennifer, I was just talking about the massive amount of evidence that police and prosecutors have unearthed implicating Bryan Kohberger. Go through it. We've got DNA, phone records, cars seen in the area, his ridiculous alibi, his Amazon purchases, his internet searches. Go through it if you can, everything that implicated him.
Well, that was good, Elizabeth. You just ran through it pretty quickly, and it is so rock solid. But when you look at that knife sheath, when you look at that DNA on there, that was really the end all in this case. That really made it difficult. But then you add onto it the 30-plus visits in the vehicle, when you add onto it the digital information, when you add onto it, as you said, his ridiculous alibi. He was in a corner. The time ran out, Elizabeth. There were no more extensions, and they weren't allowed to use the third-party culprit defense. He was in a corner, and that's why he pled.
And just so, in case our viewers haven't been following every single step of this case, the knife sheath. The knife sheath was left near one of the victims who was murdered. The knife has never been found, but the knife sheath had his DNA on it at the crime scene.
Exactly, near Maddie Mogan. And furthermore, Amazon records showed that he purchased a K-bar knife and a knife sheath matching the description of that K-bar knife. So that's another implication to Bryan Kohberger being responsible. I wanted to add really quickly that if you look at Dennis Rader was the BTK strangler, and what he did in his case, he pled. He pled surprisingly. He stood silent just like BTK. I always wondered if Bryan Kohberger, if given the opportunity, would plead.
Ashleigh, what's your sense on that? There's long been speculation that Kohberger, was taking criminology classes and studying this at college at a nearby college town, that he was sort of obsessed with committing the perfect crime. Might he be the kind of person who will want to brag, God forbid, about this horrific thing?
Oh, I'm glad Jennifer brought that up, because it's been going through my mind for the last hour. BTK stood up in court and talked. Jennifer, do you remember, was it 2 hours where he went into such excruciatingly minute detail, almost though he was reliving every one of his murders, and he made us all sick to our stomachs as we watched, where he just matter-of-factly threw out, and then I just strangled her, and then I just raped her, and then I just raped the other one. I don't know if Bryan Kohberger is the same personality. I can't read that man on your screen. I have watched him shuffle with his shackled feet, and visit after visit look. To that. Yep, that vacant stare. I can't tell who this guy is. All I can say is that I really hope that this is a more detailed allocution for the sake of the families who want answers, but I hope it's not so detailed that they will create images that the families can never get out of their minds.
All right, Ashleigh Banfield, I know you've got to go prep for your show tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer Coffindaffer, Brian Entin, please stick with us over the break. We're going to continue our breaking news coverage of this bombshell out of Idaho. Bryan Kohberger, accused in the murders of 4 college students, suddenly decides to plead guilty to all 4 murders. Trial attorney Mercedes Colvin will join me to break down what's next in the legal moves. And you can follow the very latest on this breaking news on our NewsNation app. You can find it on Apple App Store and Google Play. All right, back now with our breaking news coverage of that astonishing development out of Idaho, brought to you by our own Brian Entin, right here on NewsNation First. That accused Idaho killer Bryan Kohberger has accepted a plea deal. The state of Idaho will now drop the death penalty in exchange for Kohberger pleading guilty to murdering 4 University of Idaho college students in November of 2022. He will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he will have to waive all of his rights to appeal. Back with us now is NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Entin, NewsNation law and justice contributor and former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, and also joining me at the desk is trial attorney Mercedes Colwin. And Mercedes, I'm going to start with you because you're the only person here who wasn't surprised.
I'm not.
You thought this was going to happen.
Well, think about all the wagons that were circling Kohberger. The fact that the DNA of the ninth sheep was coming in, there was a motion to suppress. The fact that they had made a motion to this alternate perpetrators theory, that was the most devastating blow, the most recent devastating blow.
The judge just threw that out last week.
Exactly, because they had identified, the defense had identified 4 individuals. Thankfully, the judge redacted their names and said this would create such chaos for these jurors because they had already complied with an investigation behind the scenes with law enforcement. They took the DNA swabs of each of them. They were cleared. No DNA evidence whatsoever was found in the crime scene.
Why on earth did Bryan Kohberger think he could come into court and have his attorneys implicate 4 men whose DNA wasn't found at the crime scene and who had alibis and were cleared? I don't understand why he even thought that was possible.
That's the million-dollar question. We're dealing with the mind that thinks he is better and above all else. If we ever find out the reasons behind these killings, and we suspect it's like some sort of fantasy in his mind, having been a criminal law student, that somehow he would to actually perpetrate the perfect crime and get away with it, then he thinks he's smarter than his lawyers. But if the lawyers were really looking at this, and they were fighting for his life, I mean, they were trying everything conceivable, including postponing the trial. They were thinking they were going to continue to develop the defense. But at this point, there was no defense. They couldn't even bring in an alibi because in Idaho law, it requires the alibi to be substantiated by a witness, a testimony that comes in and says, I saw Kohberger driving around and actually give the times that actually support the alibi. Without that supporting witness, you cannot even bring an alibi into the entire mix.
Jennifer, you say this is actually a big win for Bryan Kohberger. Why?
It's a huge win because the evidence was so strong against him. And sadly, I think it's an empty feeling for those families. It really is, Elizabeth, because they're looking at it saying, look at the powerful evidence. This is what we call in the FBI a whale in the bucket. That's how easy this case would have been to try from the standpoint of evidence. And now he gets to spend the rest of his life in prison instead of possibly getting the death penalty.
And Brian, you've got, do we know if these families who are, we know from one of the families that they are absolutely devastated and shocked at the plea deal, the Gonzalez family, will any of them be in court on Wednesday when this is formalized legally?
I suspect that they will be there. I suspect most of the families will be there because this is such a pivotal moment. I'll tell you, there's one family member who I was just talking to before I came on your show who was very emotional and said she feels like all of the power has been given back to Bryan Kohberger. That's how she feels. She says they were told at the last minute that they were going to present this plea deal to him, and then he got the power and he got to make the decision of whether he was going to take it or whether he wanted to go to trial. And I think that is what is bothering some of the family members so much. They've tried to work through all of this with counseling and sort of like get their power back. Yeah. And now they feel like in the end, he had all the power, which does make sense when you think about their perspective on that.
No, it makes complete sense. Mercedes, we were talking before the break about the possibility or the impossibility now with this plea deal that these families will get the answers as to why. Why did you do this? Why did you break into this home and slaughter these 4 amazing, bright, young adults with their entire lives ahead of them? Why? Well, they might not ever get the answer to that. The allocution that we were discussing doesn't force somebody to do that.
Exactly, it doesn't. I mean, what the allocution is generally is you've accepted this plea, you understand that you're going to be in prison for life.
It's not an explanation as to what happened.
No, it's not part of the plea. So part of the plea is just understanding what he has actually pled guilty to, understanding that he will spend the rest of his days in prison, and understanding that he has no right to appeal. That's what a general allocution is. Unless there's some sort of agreement between both the prosecution
say to the prosecutors, we want you to force him to explain this in court. Can they do that?
I'm sure they've already asked him that, because now that they know that the die is cast and that they have no ability to change what's already happened, that the plea's been accepted, that we're going to go into this victim impact statement. By the way, it's going to be gut-wrenching, because you're going to hear from these parents whose children were slaughtered, and they're going to continue to live the nightmare, not knowing why their children were slaughtered. All they know is that this man's life is spared and their children are dead.
Yeah, Brian, I know you're in touch with the families. I can't even fathom what they're all going through tonight. All right, Mercedes Colwin, Brian Entin, Jennifer Coffindaffer, thank you all so much. Really, really appreciate it. All right, we are going to switch gears in our next commercial break, because we're following the very latest on that horrifying ambush on firefighters who were responding to a blaze apparently set deliberately. We're going to have the very latest on the man who started that fire and took shots at the firefighters next. All right, turning now to another breaking news story out of Idaho. Police are trying to figure out why a young man allegedly started a wildfire on a mountain and then, in a sniper position, shot at a group of firefighters as they responded to that fire, killing 2 of them and seriously injuring a 3rd. It happened yesterday in Coeur d'Alene, a small community in northern Idaho. Just moments ago, officials shared information on those firefighters who were killed.
It saddens me to announce that Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, 42 years old, has been a member of our department for 17 years, passed away in the line of duty yesterday. Chief Harwood is married, has 2 children. He is also a former Army National Guard combat engineer.
Battalion Chief John Morrison sustained fatal gunshot wounds yesterday and died in the line of duty. John Morrison began his career with the Coeur d'Alene Fire Department back in 1996. He's the battalion chief of Blue Shift, and he's held the ranks of firefighter, engineer, captain, battalion chief, and he's also a longtime paramedic.
Officials also announced that a 3rd firefighter who was shot is in critical condition, has undergone 2 successful surgeries today. Earlier this afternoon, police identified the suspect as 20-year-old Wes Rowley. A local sheriff said Rowley had no criminal history and he didn't leave behind any kind of manifesto or notebook, as far as officials are aware. Law enforcement found Rowley dead in the mountains yesterday evening with a gun beside him. The sheriff says it appears that Rowley shot himself. Officers used cell phone data to find him, and when they did, they had to quickly get his body because flames from the fire were quickly approaching. That fire has now grown to nearly 30 acres. We have an idea now of how Rowley started it.
Rowley was found to be in possession of a flint starter, and we believe that was his method for starting the fire. That eventually led to firefighters responding.
Now, Rowley allegedly started the fire and then began shooting at the firefighters who he called to put the fire out. And this all happened about 40 minutes after those firefighters responded to the call. But according to the sheriff, before Rowley started shooting, Rowley had an interaction with the firefighters about where his car was parked. Take a listen to this dispatch audio during the attack.
Some law enforcement right now, there's an active shooter zone. They're shot. BC3's down, BC1's down. Everybody's shot up here. Law enforcement, code 3 now. We've got 2 unresponsive battalion chiefs, gunshot wounds, multiple gunshot wounds. 2 Coeur d'Alene firefighters are down.
Let's go right now to NewsNation's Alex Capriello. He's on the ground in Coeur d'Alene. Alex, we've got a lot of information coming out now about this suspect and also about the firefighters that he shot. Do we have any clue at all what would motivate somebody to do something this horrific?
No, and that's the big question right now for investigators as they're simultaneously battling 2 fronts. First one, the fire that's still within the mountainside, and then secondly, trying to find out more details about this gunman and about what might have motivated that attack. But as you rightly pointed out, and as we just heard from those chiefs from these fire departments, the firefighters that were actually killed in the line of duty have just been identified. Battalion Chief Frank Harwood, as well as Battalion Chief John Morrison, the critical condition engineer by the name of Dave Tisdale. So a tragedy that's happened happening right here in the panhandle of Idaho. As for more information about the gunman, that all came from an earlier press conference with the sheriff, who shared a lot more details about who he was and what they know about him. First and foremost, they say he's originally from California, but has been living here in Idaho for at least the last year. In fact, police say that they've had several encounters with him over the last few years, mostly minor calls of trespassing. The sheriff says that he's been living in his car for as far as they know, and various restaurants actually called in for welfare checks to get him off the property. And most of the time he had been cooperative and didn't really pose any sort of threat at all. In fact, he had no criminal history whatsoever, the sheriff says. They say that at this point now they're looking at his social media to try to find out what really is the motivation behind this. As you rightly pointed out, no manifesto has been found, and in fact, most of his social media accounts have been wiped, the sheriff says. However, they were able to pull at least one picture, which is the one that we've been showing you, showing what allegedly is the moments before the attacks, with Roley dressed in camouflage and face paint, presumably to hide in those woods undetected. They also say that Roley took his own life, according to their information, but not hours after that long gunfight with the deputies on that mountainside. The authorities believe that he actually used a shotgun to carry out this attack. However, Elizabeth, rifle cartridges were also found on the mountainside. So at this point in the investigation, they're also looking possibly for any other weapons that might be up there. As for what happens now, the family also is reportedly arborist. This is interesting details as well, and that gives the deputies an idea that he might have been actually carrying out that gunfire from high up top those treetops. This is all very, very shocking information for everyone here in Idaho, including his roommate, who broke his silence earlier today. Take a listen.
It hurts my heart, but it also scares the crap out of me, because he lived in my home under my roof and while I was sleeping, and you just never know when someone can snap, I guess. But I'm just kind of in a little bit of shock about the whole thing.
And the latest update from fire officials is that it has now been contained to around 24 acres. It has not grown. They believe that they will be in full control of it by at least tonight. Elizabeth?
All right, and Alex, just because it went by pretty quickly, you said his family, they're arborists. That means they're tree climbers. So he was an experienced tree climber.
Yeah, that was an absolutely unbelievable detail for me to hear. That's absolutely right. They believe that he had experience from his past in climbing trees, and he was able to ascend to the treetops and carry out some of that gunfire from up top there. I should also mention that the family of Roley has also recently released their own statement. They express sorrow and deep remorse for everything that's happened to this community, but are asking for privacy at this time.
And is the family in that community, or is the family still in, where is the family?
It's not clear to me at this point where the family is, but we do know that Roley, while he had a brief stint here in Idaho, also had residency in California and Arizona as well.
Okay, Alex Capriello on the ground in Coeur d'Alene with the details on this really tragic story. Thank you so much. I want to bring in Ed Kelly now, president of the International Association of Firefighters. Ed, thanks so much for being here. Have you ever seen anything like this, where somebody sets a fire? We don't know yet if he set the fire purposely to lure firefighters there so he could then shoot them, or if that was just a crime of opportunity he seized. But either way, have you ever seen anything like this?
Unfortunately, Elizabeth, it's not the first time. We had an issue in upstate New York where an individual lit his house on fire. When the firefighters responded, he opened fire on the police officers and the firefighters that responded. We had another one in LA County, another one in Boston, where it's not the first time we've seen someone light a fire to lure first responders in and then open fire on them, unfortunately.
The local sheriff says in this case, it was a, quote, total ambush, and that it was a trap, basically. How vulnerable are firefighters in situations like this? You're racing in to put out an emergency, to help people, and you're not thinking, oh my gosh, someone might be trying to kill me.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is it's the last thing that you're anticipating. You know, when you're responding to a fire, you're trying to do a size up to analyze what the hazards are, who is at risk, doing risk-benefit analysis on what the tactical response needs to be. So your mind is in thinking about trying to survive being shot at. And unfortunately, you know, like I said, this isn't the first time we've seen this. But, you know, for two firefighters that went to work with the purest of intentions, who took an oath to put their lives on the line, to risk their lives for others, to be murdered in the performance of their duty is beyond tragic. It's beyond awful.
Yeah.
And it's terribly sad. And our thoughts and prayers are not only with the families of our fallen, but also with our brother that is that's struggling right now and has a tough fight ahead of him, who was also shot and wounded up on that mountain.
Yeah, that is a very tough thing that community is going through. And as you rightly pointed out, those firefighters were rushing in to help. And that's what we hope they'll do whenever we call 911. And this person was waiting for them to murder. Really something. Ed Kelly, thank you so much for all you do and for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and God bless America.
Thanks. Coming up, everything is coming up roses for President Trump, from the stock markets to Supreme Court rulings and a ceasefire in the Middle East. But can he secure his biggest win yet with the big, beautiful bill? We're live on Capitol Hill with the very latest next. The executive branch had a huge week last week, but today it's the legislative branch reminding us that, oh yes, Congress has the power of the purse as they debate the president's agenda, the so-called big, beautiful bill. The lawmakers are looking at final changes before taking a final vote on the measure, and if it passes, Trump's former right-hand man, Elon Musk, is threatening to form a new political party. He posted on X just a short while ago, quote, "If this insane spending bill passes, the America Party will be formed the next day. Our country needs an alternative to the Democrat-Republican uniparty so that people actually have a voice." Now, among the proposed amendments fueling debate this afternoon is restoring clean energy, which was gutted by the Trump measure, a potential farm bill fight, and changes to state moratorium on artificial intelligence. But the hottest issue that's fueling debate tonight remains Medicaid and Medicaid cuts. The administration has argued that Medicaid rolls ballooned under the Biden administration to include many able-bodied working-age men who should never have been eligible to begin with. Still, North Carolina Senator Republican Tom Tillis blasted the proposed slashing of Medicaid benefits in a fiery speech on the Senate floor.
It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made. I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed.
The move drew anger from President Trump, who threatened to launch a primary challenger to face the two-term Senator Tillis. But in a preemptive move, Tillis announced he's not going to seek re-election when his term is up. Tillis's opposition to the big, beautiful bill could kill it. He and his fellow Republican Senator Paul Rand are both saying no to the measure. And Senate Majority Leader John Thune can only risk losing one more vote before the bill is dead. NewsNation Washington correspondent Joe Khalil joins us now. Joe, how long are they going to continue to haggle over this? And will it pass when they do finally take a vote?
Well, there is no time limit on this vote-a-rama, this thing you're watching right now. Senators proposing amendments, so it could go for days, theoretically. We expect, per most of our sources, think sometime overnight they'll probably wrap this up and then you may get a vote. But it is not at all guaranteed, Elizabeth, that the Senate passes this bill. As you laid out, 2 Republicans have already firmly said they are no votes. One more they can afford, 2 more, and that is it for this bill. And there are more than 2 that have raised serious concerns, mostly, as you pointed out, about Medicaid. The concern among many that I'm hearing the most is this, that if people are pushed off the Medicaid rolls, rural hospitals that rely almost totally on Medicaid patients might actually close. And those are rural, red, conservative areas where President Trump has done very well. But in some cases, those areas don't have 3 or 4 or 5 hospitals. They just have the one. That was the argument Tillis made. Today, I am told, even in the House, several Republicans there are concerned, because remember, what the Senate does today has to go back to the House. The Senate has made changes more so than what the House expected them to do. So if the Senate, and that's a big if, passes the bill tonight, it is still a long uphill battle for President Trump, for now Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who's going to have to do this thing all over again, get his members on board. So the White House today feels very bullish. They feel confident, but it is still going to be a long road for them.
All right, perhaps another all-nighter in the works there with Vote-A-Rama going down. Joe Khalil, thank you so much. For more, let's bring in former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, Republican governor. All right, Governor, Trump views this bill as his defining legacy-making issue. He has been posting throughout the process, urging senators to get in line, warning those who are wavering. Remember, you still have to get reelected. Is he going to be able to do this, to push this through, ram this through?
I think so. I think so. And I don't think the bill is legacy making. I think it's the beginning of a series of bills that could be legacy making. And he knows that if this one doesn't move forward, well, that's the first domino that has to fall for the rescission bills to come, for all these other pieces that he wants to see, all these cuts in discretionary spending that theoretically should come this fall. But if he can't get this one, the whole agenda starts to really fall apart on him. So that'll be the main driver why, when it goes back to the House of Representatives, it'll pass the Senate. When it goes back to the House, even with all these changes, will the House actually move it forward? I think so. I think they'll begrudgingly do it, but I think they understand that this one is pretty big just in terms of what happens over the next couple of years and its implications in the 2026 elections.
The Medicaid issue is a big issue, as we just heard Joe Khalil lay out. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 16 million Americans would be tossed off Medicaid. We're not talking illegal aliens. We're talking American citizens. And polls show that this view, 5 different polls show this bill is very unpopular with Americans right now. Why is President Trump pushing this so hard?
It's the problem is the messaging, right? I think that this idea that 16 million Americans are going to get thrown off, I would personally very much, as a former governor who ran a Medicaid program, I would disagree with that. They're not just throwing people off willy-nilly. They're saying, okay, all these folks of the expanded program, where the federal government pays 90%, you have to show that it's designed for able-bodied working adults, but you got to be trying to get a job. We want to incentivize folks to get to the private sector. The messaging out of the Republican side is terrible. It's awful. They've missed the opportunity to show all the benefits that this brings, why this stuff has to happen. They're just kind of going through the motions, hoping that it drives forward, and you get the Tom Tillises of the world kind of using the Democrats' talking points against them. So it's challenging on the messaging side. They got to get it through. And again, we'll see where the actual numbers play out. But the Democrats have really done a job in terms of scaring people on this one.
Yeah, well, I actually watched Senator Katie Britt over the weekend. She did I thought, a great job in explaining the benefits of it. But she needs to be talking perhaps to her fellow Republican senators like Tom Tillis and others who are out there very publicly saying this is bad. This is bad for America. This is bad for my constituents. You know who else is saying this is bad? It's Elon Musk, former best buddy to President Trump. He told his 200 million followers today the big, beautiful bill is, quote, utterly insane and destructive, calling the Republican Party the Porky Pig Party. And then, as we just said, vowing this afternoon that Republicans who vote for this bill, quote, will lose next year if it's the last thing I do on this earth. He's really, I mean, we know that some Republicans are nervous about facing midterm elections next year after taking a vote on a bill that might kick people off Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah, right. So you have Trump and his war chest on one side and Elon and his war chest on the other. I personally don't think that I don't think this bill is going to define one versus the other. And ultimately, those two don't actually want to be in a war with each other. I understand Elon's frustration. I share a lot of that in that, the whole idea of this administration was to cut costs, to get the deficit and debt under control. We're not seeing any of that yet. And I think what the Republicans need to do is be a little more vocal about, if this goes, here's all the rescission bills. Here's all the cuts that DOJ came up with, those ideas that DOJ came up with. Here's where those are going to come. And I think that's Elon's ultimate frustration, is that he put a lot of time and work, maybe some pretty bad messaging in there as well, and it's not really coming to fruition. I share his sympathies. Yeah. I'm a balanced budget hawk. I think there's a huge opportunity to actually start appreciating America owes this money, not the government. You do, I do, my neighbors do, $37 trillion. We owe that. And so somewhere along the line, those costs have to kind of come to bear. Understand what no one talks about? Hundreds of billions of new spending in this bill. So that's exactly why Rand Paul and Elon Musk and folks like that are very frustrated.
Yeah, true. The deficit and the debt is only going up, folks, in the wrong direction.
That's right.
Chris Sununu, Governor Sununu, great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so what does Chris Cuomo think of all this? He joins me live to give us his opinion next. Chris Cuomo joins me now live to discuss all things happening on Capitol Hill, this big vote-a-rama, and of course, Elon Musk now threatening to form a brand new political party. Maybe he should call you. You've been talking about a new party.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think you're a party away. I talk about this with Andrew Yang all the time. The system of the binary battle to the bottom only works for the parties. That's why inaction is the rule of the day, because cooperating, Tillis is right.
Yeah.
The senator's right. Cooperation, being incremental, compromise, that's weakness in an environment of extremism.
And we saw Joe
what just happened in Idaho.
Kirsten Sinema both get
they're all getting out.
Yeah.
They're all getting out. And extremism is in.
Yeah.
And if you look at what just happened in Idaho, I keep saying it. This punk-ass kid is just the latest. There will be more. In this environment of extremism, it lends itself to fundamentalism. And these people are going to act on their perverse politics, and they're going to kill, and they're going to be violent, because that's where we are. You got to see it. And there are mistakes that were made with MAGA that should not be made again with this lefty reaction to it. That's what I'm talking about at the top of the show.
All right, looking forward to it, Chris. Have a great show.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.